Common Knowledge is brought to you by PureMTGO.com and InkedGaming.com. Use coupon code CCMTG10 at checkout for a 10% discount on all Inked Gaming supplies and accessories. You can support the show directly through Patreon at patreon.com/common knowledge.
This is the Common Knowledge Podcast. It's not about the cost, it's about the knowledge. Here are your hosts, Brandon Clark and Lobbert.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is episode 55 of the Common Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon, and joined with me, as always, is the mighty Sean the Lobbert. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. This week I did a whole bunch of competitive leagues. I did like 3 of them. I did 2 with this Jundless that I'm testing out, and I got all of my dreams crushed. Man, I was at like an 80% win rate in my practice games, and then I went into competitive, and it was just like, nah, man. Like, one league I lost 3 games in a row to just Blue-Black Delver. Just one right after another one. And then the next league lost 3 games in a row, all to Boros decks. And, you know, I kind of gave up. Like, I was like, well, let's just play something meta. Like, I feel like brewing is really, really hard right now. The power level of these top decks is insanely high. So I played a league with Burn, and I did really well, actually. And yeah. How was your week?
It was fine. I've been battling a cold for the last, 2 or 3 days, and so is my wife, but somehow our child has just been unaffected, and we don't have the energy to keep up with him normally, let alone when we're dying of the plague. So it's been rough, but I haven't played much Magic yet, honestly, this week either, so I actually am going to try to play a league tomorrow since I don't have school. Friday's kind of my day off. So I'm planning on playing a league tomorrow, and it's weird. So I've been seeing so much, like you talked about, like you're playing competitive leagues, right?
Yeah.
And see, I experienced the same thing where it was just like tons of Boros, tons of Tron, mostly tons of Blue-Black Delver. But I just got so sick and tired of being in queues for 5 minutes because competitive leagues are like 50 people.
Yeah.
That I switched over to friendly leagues because there were more players. So it's like, well, more players means slower queue times, which is true. I think the longest I've been in a queue in a friendly league was like 4 minutes. But I've noticed that the meta there is completely different.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah.
People are still just playing whatever they want to play, and you just kind of get a run over them with like Boros or with Blue-Black Delver. I don't know. I have endured a bit of salt too from people who are like, "Why aren't you in competitive leagues with this deck?" And I'm just like, I didn't want to wait in the queue. I just wanted to play. I didn't realize that there was I guess there's like some unwritten rule in the friendly leagues that you don't play one of these meta decks. You just, I don't know. So it's interesting. I went over there to try to be able to actually play Magic instead of just wait by my computer, and I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's really the divide where, like, I mean, I think playing the same decks over and over was kind of a symptom of there's so few players that it will pair you with the same person. It's not afraid to do that 2 or 3 times, especially if you end one league and then start another. If that person's still playing, you're almost guaranteed to get them again. So I think you have to be kind of careful of that if you're gonna chain together games like that in a competitive league. And a side note, they did actually start showing format points online this week.
Yeah, they have.
And that was nice because, like, I did a challenge and I was like, well, I'm not going to take the time to do another challenge if I don't know if I'm getting my format points. I thought we were supposed to be getting them already, and they did show up on my account eventually.
Okay,
So
so it backfilled
it
all
did.
the points that you should have had. Okay, that's
Yeah,
good.
I was pretty salty, and like I was Googling, like, where do format points show? Are they not just showing up on Magic Online like the qualifier points and all that?
Yeah.
And they are now.
Okay, cool. So you got yourself a few.
Yeah, 3.
Yeah, I think if we're gonna get Sean to a pro tour, we've got to get him to play something that's real.
Well, Burn has been feeling really, really good. I can do leagues in like an hour. Like, I guess if queue times permit, I can do them pretty quick.
Yeah.
I'm pretty good at that deck.
How do you
And
feel though with Burn in relation to like everything else? To like the other, if you know that you're going to play against these same three decks, Tron, Boros variants, Delver variants, majority of the time, I think like the meta share between the three of them is like 19% blue black, 11% Tron, and then like another close to 20% Boros. So it's like close to 50%, if not more, of the meta currently.
um
So
I feel I can eke out games a lot of the time. It's not the best. Like
mm,
Tron I feel good. I can go into that matchup and feel good.
sure.
Just because like nothing I'm really doing is putting cards in their graveyard for Pulse of Marasa. And then the other ones, I found that I can kind of next level people by just taking out every creature in my deck. And I have a sideboard plan for that of just like, I'm just creatureless burn now, and every removal spell you have is just going to rot in your hand. Congratulations. Those aren't going in your graveyard to, play your anglers quicker. Sometimes I just Molten Rain people and get them.
Hmm.
I have some pretty decent plans. I have to be careful about playing around days, but that's it's just resonating with me. I don't know if I would recommend it to everybody, especially the other versions. Like if you're playing, I still don't like. I want to say Thornbow Archer, Firebrand Archer, and Thermo Alchemist, because there's just in these top 3 decks, there's a ton of removal, and you need to get something out of that creature.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've been feeling so similar with elves, with the exception of the Tron matchup. That's just really bad. I do really like elves in a lot of the other matchups. Blue black is probably the next worst just because of echoing decay. So you've kind of got to be careful about how you manage your elves and stuff. Like if I have the option between running out a second copy of an elf or playing a different elf, I'll try to play the different elf just so I don't get blown out by echoing decay quite as much. But I really like the Boros matchup with elves.
Hmm.
You can kind of go wide. Sometimes they can just like race you if they've got just like a steady stream of removal and a battle screech. They can just kind of race you in the air. But sometimes I don't know. Elves just has such a diversity of threats against Boros, and they go wide enough, and they have enough like bigger than 1/1 creatures that
Yeah, I like that you can make them nervous about playing that Monarch.
yeah, yeah, you can sometimes steal the Monarch. And yeah, yeah. I don't hate the Boros matchup. I actually think it's pretty good
Mhm.
for the Elf stack. But the Tron matchup's just been really horrible, and Blue Black Delver is hard, just because the biggest difference between the matchups is Boros has no answer to Distant Melody or Lead the Stampede. So they can expend all of their resources dealing with your board, and then you just cast Lead the Stampede, and you're just getting them on card advantage, even if they have the Monarch. But Delver just can echoing decay your things, kill your things, stabilize the ground with Agra Bolas, attack you in the air with Delver of Secrets. and then once they've grinded you down, they just got a handful of dazes and foils for your leads and your distant melodies. And so I think that matchup, I think like that alone makes it more difficult, just that they can answer that card. But anyway,
Yeah,
should we get into the card of the week?
absolutely.
Card of the week.
All right. Card of the week this week is Bojuka Bog.
I chose this one. It was a debate whether we were going to do Relic for a second time or Bojuka Bog, and I won.
I think you won because you realized that we had done Relic for a second time.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it went.
I think we had at one point come to a consensus that, all right, fine, we'll do Relic. So I guess I won the argument, and then you went, oh wait, we've already done Relic, and I said, oh, let's do Bojuka Bog then. So technically, I won the argument because you agreed to do Relic until we figured out we'd already done it. And then I was the bigger man and said, cool, let's do Bojuka Bog then. Okay. So get out of here with this nonsense.
Definitely the bigger man.
Yeah, I am. Well, I mean, not physically. You'd break me in half with your bare hands. But morally.
Fat. Anyway.
Not fat. You're just like 6'4".
Anyway, so Bojuka Bog, it was actually on our list, or on the list of the top most played cards in Pauper on the MTG Top 8 site. And I think there's good reason for that. It easily slots into a lot of these decks. Like, it doesn't slot into the pillars, except for maybe like Boros Monarch. I think that they've started running that card just as like in addition to
I've played against it in the main deck from Tron.
In Tron, true. You're right.
Is that like a normal thing for it to be in the main deck?
Yeah, I think it actually is. I kind of forgot about it.
Yeah, I've been got with that, where they're just like turn one Relic of Progenitus, and I've got like 2 Gurmag Anglers in hand, and I'm just like,
wait, Relic?
Yeah. Oh shoot, Bojuka Bog. I'm so confused. We're not talking about Relic. We're talking about Bojuka Bog. I have seen it in Tron too. I've seen both. I've seen both out of Tron.
Yeah, it's like very low cost for a lot of decks to just jam one in there, and the amount of advantage it gives you of just like time against the deck that's super fast. Like if you're playing against the blue-black Delver, it's fast enough that you can actually keep up now, whereas like a gain land isn't really going to do that same thing in like Radiant Fountain. And then against Tron, same deal. It's just less targets for their Ghostly Flicker guys.
Yeah. I think the reason I don't particularly like it against Tron is just that the Tron player can kind of control when they're using their graveyard, and most of the time the Ghostly Flicker, or like their targets in the graveyard, are usually just the Ghostly Flicker they're casting out of their hand. Mm-hmm. And so Bojuka Bog being sorcery speed is really kind of a hindrance there. Where I really like it right now is against Angler decks.
Yeah.
Because, the Angler decks can't control, when they do with their graveyard. They've got to react sort of, at sorcery speed. And if they Bojuka Bog you and you had 5 cards in your graveyard, and next turn we're planning on casting Gurmag Angler, well, now you just can't anymore.
It's like not the most amazing effect. Like, you want more out of it most of the time, of like, you want it to be instant speed, you want it to do these other things, but
play crop rotation.
The cost on it is really low though, just to begin with.
Yeah, it's basically, I don't want to say free, but the cost is really small of just putting a land in your deck. The cost of it is that it comes into play tapped, and that it produces only black mana. So, those are the 2 costs, and those are very small.
Yeah, the only other thing I can think of is like maybe it'll catch like a Faithless Looting, or like these little incidental spells, Chainer's Edicts, what's the protection? Not protection.
Prismatic strands.
Prismatic strands. Yeah, like a
Yeah,
lot of the time, it'll just get half of a card, maybe 2 cards in the graveyard. So it's like these little advantages type of thing. So
yeah,
I think it's a really good card right now.
yeah. I agree. It's definitely not as powerful as Relic is,
Yeah.
but it does good work. It's, I think, a lot less worse in your main deck than Relic is, obviously, because it's multifunctional as it's a land, and so much of the format does rely on the graveyard that you can almost always get some amount of value out of it. And if you can't, like, I don't know, sometimes you just play it on turn one and you don't care.
Yeah. I think its ability to reset the graveyard so that you can keep your relic up is also like a relevant thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. That is unique synergy. Sometimes you don't want to crack your relic, so
Mhm.
being able to, yeah, have that way to wipe the graveyard and then still keep your relic is good.
All right, let's move into the main topic,
Main topic.
the 3 pillars of Pauper.
Yeah. So this week in lieu of no bannings, we want to talk about what the format has kind of evolved into at this point, and sort of our thoughts on how to how to go forward. How to attack the meta. What decks you should consider playing in your leagues and your challenges, etc. Okay, so I mean, first thing first, we're gonna just kind of establish what those 3 pillars are in our mind, and well, maybe not our mind, but I think
It's established.
yeah, it's established at this point. We've got Gush decks, Monarch decks, and Tron decks.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you say Monarch decks because I think there is an increasing amount of black Monarch decks that are showing up.
Yeah, between like mono black control decks playing Thorn of the Black Rose and this red black Monarch deck,
Yeah.
I think that it's safe at this point to go from saying Boros decks to just saying Monarch decks. It's kind of like the Gush decks, are at this point more than just Delver decks.
Mm-hmm.
I think that like the most dominant Gush decks are the Delver decks, and the most dominant Monarch decks are the Boros decks, but there's still a pretty wide range of decks that make use of the mechanic.
I think one of the reasons that that's the case, like the reason Monarch is good right now, is you can beat a lot of strategies if you just have the infinite value and you're just trying to buy time. Like, if you're just the Monarch long enough, your opponent will die. Like, that's just a fact.
Yeah, and the decks that play the Monarch, staying the Monarch is not hard for them.
Yeah.
Pestilence decks that have Thorn of the Black Rose are probably never getting attacked. The Boros decks have Battle Screech to create infinite chump blockers and Prismatic Strands to fog combat damage. And they really only need, 1 or 2 turns of being the Monarch to start pulling ahead. And then they get to a point where the game's just locked down.
And it forces your opponent to play poorly. Like, I've been in the position frequently lately, since I was playing that Jund list, that I have an Angler or 2 in play, and they have 1 or 2 red mana open. You're forced to attack into Battle Screech tokens where they can Galvanic Blast your creature, because you need to pressure them to get them to give up creatures for that Monarch. You can't just wait and see if things improve. They're not going to improve. If they are the Monarch, you're in a losing position. You start having to make really bad decisions, and then they just run away with the game.
Yeah, I think the best way that I've found to try to fight against Monarch is you need to just be able to get under them.
Yep.
Have a strong threat and manage their board so that they almost just can't cast that Monarch spell, because they'll draw 1 card off of it. They tapped out all their mana to play this 4-drop, and then you're just going to take it away from them right away. And that's not always easy to do, because Monarch decks have access to some of the most powerful removal spells in the format. The Black Monarch decks can play Pestilence and Terminate. The white decks have, Galvanic Blasts, Journey to Nowheres. So that's not always easy to do, to be able to manage their board and keep a good amount of pressure on them, because they're just packed full of removal. So that's the Monarch. The next pillar of the format is Gush decks. And they are primarily Delver decks, but there are a few other Gush decks that exist. I don't know that I would consider them, a relevant part of the metagame, but they exist.
And they function in, like, are you talking about like Tribe?
I'm talking about like Tribe and Is It Blitz?
They run into some issues specifically because of the other Gush decks of, like, those decks can cast multiple spells a turn. They can go under you. Like, I feel like the fast decks of the format feel like they're Gush decks. Like they're not killing you especially fast. It's that they're applying pressure quickly and controlling that really early part of the game. Am I wrong there? I mean, they're not particularly fast. They just feel like fast decks because their interaction comes in so early.
Yeah, the Delver decks are definitely mid-range decks. They're not super aggressive. They're not super aggro. But when they do kill you, they kill you really fast. And that's just the nature of they have just, in my opinion, two of the most powerful threats in the format, Delver of Secrets and Gurmag Angler. And it's really hard when you're a deck like Inside Out or Blitz that they're very linear. They're very all in on one specific thing. And that's really hard against a deck that has just all the best answers in the format crammed into their 75, between Counterspell, Daze, Foil, Snuff Out to kill your creatures when you think you're safe. It's hard to want to be on a very all-in linear strategy like that. Yeah, so with these Gush decks, one of the other big things about them too is just how strong they are against opposing removal.
Yeah, like Chainer's Edict is a terrible spell right now, I want to say. They have those Augur of Bolosses, man.
Well, and even Delver of Secrets. Generally, the matchups that have Chainer's Edict don't have very good threats against Gurmag Angler. Chainer's Edict is their best answer. Did I say threats? They don't have good answers against Gurmag Angler. And what I found is that in that matchup, I would just always hold my Delvers. I would never play my Delvers on early turns. I hold on to them until I can play a Gurmag Angler in the same turn. And so I'll lead with Delver and then cast Gurmag Angler so I don't lose to an Edict. And, you just kind of play out your Augurs. They're kind of forced to deal with them with their removal spells because they're trying to keep the board empty for their Edict effects. And then at the end of the day, you just kind of save your removal for them too. Or your
protection.
Your protection, your counter magic. I'm so loopy today. I'm so out of it. I'm just like drugged out on cough medicine. Anyway.
The tone of your voice is different.
Yeah, my throat's really sore. But yeah, it's tough when you're trying to rely on something so narrow to deal with such a powerful threat. I just almost would never want to play a deck with Chainer's Edict in it.
They have the Stormbound Geists that are becoming more and more popular.
Oh yeah.
And I think that strategy you're talking about plays into the strength of this deck, is that this deck, like, you know how we've said double spelling in a turn is one of the most important things in Pauper? This deck triple spells or more pretty frequently, like play creature, leave up Daze Gush, and then if they have foil, like, not to mention Snuff Out, it's just they can go past that 2 spells a turn and just play more spells than you in a turn all at once, so that you've stressed out their mana base in being able to restabilize the board pretty frequently. Like, that's the whole point of the deck, I feel like.
Yeah, and normally what's been a thing with Delver decks of the past, particularly the Scred deck, double spelling is important, but like if your double spell is preordain plus ponder, that's not very powerful. Being able to double spell in a turn and have both of those spells impact the board in some way is what's the most important. And that's one of the reasons why like cantrips are just sometimes less good in this format. But this deck can play a 1 mana 5/5 and then still be able to hold up counter magic, or just play a 1 mana 5/5 and have 2 or 3 free spells in their hand. You know, they could have Snuff Out, Daze, Gush, and so they're able to double spell in a turn cycle. But their spells are meaningful; they impact the board.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just, these. You're not like losing tempo to like use your mana so that you can, cast your cantrips, because you can just cast your cantrips freely, put a huge threat on the table, and still have powerful forms of interaction. So like you saying, you're triple spelling in a turn cycle, and the spells are impactful, and that's what's the most important part.
And a lot of them are still 2-for-1s. Like if one of them is Echoing Decay or Gush, like that's pretty crazy. I feel like that's why we're calling Blue Black Delver, the new biggest guy in town right now.
Yeah, and I mean even Gush helps instigate these instances of being able to double spell, because Gush can act as ramp.
Yeah.
They can give you that extra boost of mana so that you can do that. You can apply a threat to the board, Gush, get untapped mana again, have drawn multiple cards, and you're now free to have counter magic up or cast your Echoing Decays.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that makes Gush so powerful. Not only is it pulling you ahead on cards, it's pulling you ahead on that tempo too, because it's allowing you to more frequently double spell in a turn and make those turns impactful.
Okay, I want to move on to Tron so I can make a point about like an overarching thing between all of these decks. Actually, I have a couple points there.
Yeah, let's talk about the Tron.
So Tron is our third pillar. So we've got Monarch, Gush, and Tron. And Tron, I want to say, is the weakest pillar right now. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think the Boros decks can be fast enough that they can just run Tron over and go wide enough. And the Gush decks, particularly with Gurmag Angler, can just also get those hands, get those draws where they've applied enough pressure that, all it takes is a single foil to hit your moment's piece at the right time or something and get through that lethal damage. But I think that Tron is favored against the Gush decks, despite that, though.
Yeah, Tron's supposed to be favored against Boros Monarch. I don't know about Boros Bully. And then I would say Tron is definitely the favor against the blue red.
Yeah,
black red Monarch decks.
Okay. Yeah, I can definitely I agree that it's weak. It's better against the Monarch, like Boros Monarch deck, but the Boros Bully deck I think is probably a favorite.
Okay. So like I think the reason I still want to call this a pillar is because it's still in that tier 1 level. It might be on the low end of that tier 1 level, but the difference between tier 1 and the next highest tier, I feel like there's a big gap there. We've talked about trying to fight Tron before, and they do attack on some pretty tough to interact with accesses. Like, it's got that the Ghostly Flicker combo you can get rid of in the graveyard, kind of, but they can also interact with, like, they can Dinrova Horror your Relic, or counter it on its way down. They can protect it like that. They also just kind of have a good creature plan, card advantage, so, like, trying to interact with any of these decks is really tough. One of the points I wanted to make about all of them is that none of them seem to care about removal. the Boros pillar, not Boros pillar, the Monarch pillar has creatures that it gets value from and then doesn't care about anymore. They've already kind of done their job. If you're expending resources on their creatures, they're fine to go forward with their plan of just make the board safe for Monarch. The Gush decks have protection spells and demand that you have very specific ways to kill their creatures. Like Augur of Bolas, you can't do less than 2 damage to it, and you can't really force them to block with it. Like, most creatures don't kill Augur of Bolas. Most creatures have 2 power, or way more, I guess. I guess there's creatures with 4 and 5, but then those aren't really important in the first place. The 5/5 demands like those very 4 specific removal spells in your deck that it can counter already. And then the Tron deck, of course, it wants you to play that removal spell so that it can Ghostly Flicker its creature and just make you feel silly about yourself. It can, like, if you kill it, oh, you actually killed it. Just kidding. Pulse of Marasa, you're never going to kill them now because they've got this weird loop. You killed it because you need to attack in. That's not happening anymore. That's why I want to say removal doesn't seem good right now, except if you're in these decks, they're just going to do it better than you.
Yeah, it's really hard, and that's one of the things I think that you've been having a lot of trouble with it, trying to brew in attacking the format and ways you can try to answer these decks is the suite of removal, that we have to fight these threats just doesn't match up very well, which is sort of interesting because one thing that I've seen a lot of people saying is one of the biggest problems with Pauper is that the answers are too good and the threats aren't good enough. And I think that, like, in this case, we're kind of seeing
a shift.
The opposite.
Yeah.
With these Monarch threats and with Gurmai Gangler specifically those two. There's just not a lot of powerful answers to these cards. And I think it's funny, like, it's true and it's not true, because at the same time, the Monarch decks are switching to this more go wide strategy that kills with Rally the Peasants, because their other creatures in the Boros Monarch version of the deck their threats just aren't good in relation to the other powerful removal. Core Skyfisher and all these other things, like, they just die. They just 1-for-1 with all your removal, and you lose a lot of tempo.
I want to disagree because they're not 1-for-1ing. You've already gotten your card out of it by bouncing your spell. So, like, if you're 1-for-1ing,
you lose so much tempo on that. Like, yeah, you bounced your 2-mana artifact, and then they killed your thing with a removal spell, and then you recast your artifact, but you lose a lot of tempo there.
You lose a lot of tempo, but I don't think that's what they care about as much. I mean, it's important, but I think what they're most concerned with is that card advantage. That's the axis that they're trying to win on. So, like, yeah, that the removal spells match up best with that deck, but eventually that deck is going to just be like, I don't care that you killed all of them. I did what I wanted anyway. Like, I was doing this thing, I was dirtling, but I stalled you. I stalled you long enough, and now you're screwed.
Okay.
I mean, Boros Bully doesn't have that same issue. Like, all of its threats are more resilient anyway, so it's not doing that dirtle thing. They're either more resilient or more diversified, right?
Yeah.
One thing between... I'm not sure whether to include Gush on this point is these decks. I mean, Boros Monarch the most obviously has the infinite value engine of Monarch. Tron also has that infinite value engine, and then Gush has the near infinite value engine of Gush. Like, it feels like that sometime. You can't establish your own thing, so it feels like if you're trying to play a value game, these decks beat you. If you're trying to play a removal deck or removal game, these decks beat you. So the only through line that we're finding is you just got to go under them, be more aggressive, or have like I don't want to say aggressive because I also think that things like Red Deck Wins and Stompy are really bad right now. Do you want to like let's just get into like how we would want to attack these pillars, okay?
Yeah, let's talk about that because I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts on Stompy because it did top 8 the most recent challenge, I believe, and in my head I thought that this might be one of the decks, one of the decks that you want going into this meta if you're not playing one of these pillars. So why do you think that it's just not very well placed? I mean, it's aggressive, it goes wide, it doesn't necessarily care about the removal out of their opponent because all their threats at the end of the day do the same thing. They're a 2/2 that attacks.
I just have a really hard time right now. I think the playing Stompy against something like Blue Black Delver or Monarch, like I think you've got the Tron matchup that seems okay, although my experience has been that I lose that most of the time. But playing against a 1/3 where you have to expend a resource to get through that if you don't want to just bump every turn, and then
Okay.
they just are like, joke's on you, I had Echoing Decay, and you just hope that they're not 2-for-1ing you with that. Like
Yeah.
they've chosen, they get to choose their blocks, and then they get to decide if they want to 2-for-1 you. If they have 2 augers or they land their angler, things get really bad for you. I think that against a Monarch deck, they have tons of removal. They have this prismatic strands. I think that it's still a respectable pick. I'm so high on these 3 decks right now that I don't know why you would play anything else. That's funny where I'm saying burn, but it's just because I don't want to play one of these decks. Like there's something in my mind that I'm just like, I just can't bring myself to sell out like that. And like like that's what it
That's
feels like. But
It's really
I
funny.
do plan on doing more leagues with Blue Black Delver for those sweet format points.
Yeah.
Because
So,
like that's how I know that I'm gonna win games.
yeah, it's actually really funny that you say that because obviously I'm the total opposite. I'll always try to play the deck that I think will give me the best chance to win the most. And this might be an unpopular opinion, but I really love the format right now.
Well,
These decks are just like these are the type of decks that I enjoy playing when you have strong answers, strong threats. It's about managing your answers. It's about, sequencing your turns well. And it's not just about, okay, well, they burned me out. Nothing I could do. Oh, Affinity just affinited me out and I didn't draw any sideboard hate. I don't like that. It's why I hate Modern. I despise everything about that format because, yeah, it's diverse. And that's the argument that everyone says, oh, Modern's the healthiest it's ever been. There's 20 decks. Yeah, but all 20 decks do the exact same damn thing. Try to kill you on turn 3 without interacting. And I hate that. That's why I love Limited so much. I love the feeling of outplaying my opponent. And I feel like I get that in Pauper. Now, granted, I get outplayed probably more than I outplay in this format, but
yeah.
I like playing matchups where my decisions feel important, and that's what I feel like I get in this format. You know, it's not just like one way. Like these 3 decks aren't just
Yeah.
powerful linear decks. They're decks that are built on having powerful interaction. I think that's one of the things that make these decks so good. Tron might be the outlier here because I guess you could argue that it's linear in the sense that it's just like build up big mana and then cast huge spells that your opponent can't do anything about.
But it's still a control deck, and control
Yeah,
decks just really aren't linear.
yeah, at the end of the day, it's still, I've never played it, but from what I've heard, the deck is hard to play correctly. There's a lot of lines that, and I really like that in Magic when the decks are interacting with each other, have powerful threats, powerful answers, and it's all sort of about trying to line up your cards against their cards in a way where you're slowly inking out the advantage. And
Yeah,
so I really am enjoying the format right now.
I get like combat matters, life total matters, and card advantage matters, and that's like what makes the game what I love. That's why I love Pauper, because those three things feel like they're always gonna matter. What I don't like is that it's so hard to brew right now. I've been through all of my decks that I've brewed over the years, and
Yeah.
honestly, I'm just like, none of these keep up. None of these are
Yeah.
good enough. I can't play any of these. Like, they're just crap. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know
I
if that
do.
was just because all of them were brewed in a Scred Delver meta where doing 2 damage is respectable, and now it just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But
I do want to say though that I don't believe the format is healthy. I do think that where we're at with these three decks is the format's going to continue to just kind of push towards these pillars and everything else. It's like you said, it's like we've got this tier one of decks with these pillar decks. And granted, yeah, there's blue black delver, there's mono blue delver, technically like Scred delver, but at this point
it's getting
that's
pushed out.
it's getting pushed out as well, and mono blue delver is kind of keeping up because I don't know, maybe it's because mono blue has access to gush. I don't know if that's the reason, but
I'm feeling like Daze is being an all-star lately.
Daze, yeah, Daze is incredible. Daze is incredible. And same with the Monarch decks, there's like 3 different versions of the Monarch deck right now. I guess like 4 if you count mono black, but mono black and the red black are the same. They're kind of the outlier. They seem to be a lot weaker than the Boros versions. And Tron also has its many different flavors, but I don't know, even despite that, it's still at the end of the day the same 3 strategies that are dominating the format. You've got big mana strategies, you've got grind them out monarch strategies, and then your delver gush strategies. And the format is polarizing a lot towards that. So I don't necessarily believe it's healthy, despite the fact that I love it, I enjoy it. This is the best.
Yeah.
The only way this could get better is if they unban Treasure Cruise.
That would be so bad.
But
That
I
would
don't,
be
I don't
so
believe that
bad.
that would be good. I
Yeah.
don't believe that the format we have right now is in a good place. And maybe it does just come down to the fact that the removal, the answers are more powerful than the threats, and these 3 decks are just playing the only powerful threats that line up with the most powerful answers, and that's why these other decks just aren't doing well. Is they just don't have powerful threats to keep up.
Yeah, and like most of them aren't playing powerful threats and this colossal value engine. Like, these decks are competing on both fronts, and it feels like they're only competing with each other. And when they meet someone else, they're like, "You're not part of the club."
Yeah,
What?
it just nothing else even seems comparable right now in power level to these decks and what they're doing. And I think that I mean, I don't know, with New World Order and the way things are, I don't know if we're ever going to get something at common that will give a boost to these other things. Like, honestly, I just don't even know if there's even downshifts at this point that could go into something else, that would make it
Well, I've
on
seen
par.
things. I've seen things that are like, that looks like it could almost do it. And I feel like there are other strategies with infinite value engines, like a Tethmost High Priest or God forbid, Tortured Existence. Like, playing against a Tethmost High Priest deck the other day, where They have Seeker of the Ways and stuff. Like they just keep returning Augur of Bolas.
Do you seek the way?
Like they just keep returning those spells. It felt along the same lines of, I don't care if you remove my creatures, or you try to remove my creature, haha, you don't kill it, I get another thing back. And then they have these creatures that can actually close out games. So like something like that, like Tethmos High Priest, I think is something like exactly what you're talking about. It doesn't have a home yet, but I'm just saying they can come along.
Maybe that needs to be your best project right now, is finding the best Tethmos deck. Because I agree, I think, with a lot of what you're saying right now. I've thought a lot about Tortured Existence in this meta right now, and the only thing that keeps me off of it is how prevalent Graveyard Hate is right now, because Graveyard Hate, like we talked about with our card of the week, affects all three of the top decks in the format right now. And so playing a deck that I do believe lines up favorably with these decks, but just gets hosed because it's so much more linear than these other decks. Like it just doesn't survive Graveyard Hate as well. I think that's one of the big problems.
So it was actually Any New Province on his stream was talking about this. If you are using cards that overlap with these other decks, so if you're like, I want to build a deck, let's start with some powerful cards. I'm going to put in Battle Screech. I'm going to put in Gurmag Angler. Those are known quantities that people have tools for right now.
Right.
And that kind of makes it a bad idea to put them in your deck. So I feel like it might be a deck that is more of an unknown, like, I don't know, maybe Tethmos, like that's the only thing I can think of right now that could break into this club.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't fight on the same axis. Like you can't do the same things as these decks. They'll do it better.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It is very different in the way that it attacks you and the way it tries to kill you, but my big problem with it is that at the end of the day, it's a graveyard strategy. You know, if you turn off their graveyard, that deck doesn't function. And, you know, Tron, main deck Graveyard Hate. Monarch decks have access to Graveyard Hate. The blue-black Delver decks have, 3 copies of Relic in their sideboard. So even though I agree with you, like, I just disagree in the sense that Relic is such an easy catch-all to any graveyard strategy, and it can go into any deck. Any deck can put it in their 75, and that's what kind of turns me off of wanting to play Tortured Existence decks. But I do really feel like Tortured Existence strategies line up really well against these other decks. They can, they have a powerful card advantage engine with Tortured Existence and Tethmos High Priest and stuff like that. And they follow the same vein of not caring about your removal. Like, sure, kill my guy. I'm going to get it back. I don't care. It's just that the fact that it just loses so badly to Relic of Progenitus really puts me off of a strategy like that.
I think you're right. And both of those strategies probably fall. Like, you don't want to be in either of those because what we brought up a minute ago of people, these are known quantities. They're already attacking these decks like this. You don't want to fall to the same way that they're attacking those. So that's kind of why I'm on Burn. Of it doesn't really attack them in the same way. It is it's not the best against lots and lots of counter spells, but it's also fast enough that maybe it can stress them out enough that it can get in. Curse of the Pierced Heart feels pretty good right now, I think. Well, we have written down here Affinity and Elves. Affinity doesn't seem too bad, actually, except for their ATOG combo. There's major problems with that.
Yeah, I think that if you want to be playing Affinity right now, you should be off Fling. like completely off of Fling. And like if you want to be playing ATOG, you should be playing it alongside of Team or Battle Rage. But yeah, I think that the ATOG combo currently is the worst thing about Affinity. The green one, the green guy, the 2/2
Yeah.
that becomes a Mofo. What's his name?
Carapace Forger?
Oh, bruh, Carapace Forger. That guy is a pain in the butt to kill, and he's just big. He's like a Tarmogoyf. He's just a big cheap threat. I don't like the ATOG like you said, but I think that Affinity, it can go wide. It's got a powerful draw spell in the form of
Thoughtcast?
yeah, Thoughtcast. I for some reason I wanted to call it Glimpse the Unthinkable. And I'm like, that's not even close at all in any way. I know that that's not what that card is called, but that's what I'm thinking of right now. Anyway, and then same with elves. Elves just sort of like, I don't want to say doesn't care about your removal, but has powerful ways to rebuild. Like I think power level wise, elves, affinity, and burn are probably some of the closest decks we have to these pillars in terms of what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, Affinity, the big fear with Affinity is always that Gorilla Shaman, and there's enough uh, red decks in, any of the Monarch decks are red. They're part red.
Yeah,
And
and a lot of them do play like 1 to 2 gorilla shamans in their sideboard.
yeah, so people do pack hate specifically for Affinity, but at least it's not just lumped in. Like, it has to be an additional spell. It can't just be something already fighting these three pillars. So if you don't see those decks, or they don't get that Gorilla Shaman, and I guess you don't die to the thing that I die with Affinity all the time, just not drawing lands or drawing too many lands. I think that's happened to you a few times too.
Yeah, yeah. I think of these three decks, the best deck to be playing if you're not going to be playing one of these pillars is Burn. I think that Burn attacks you in such a specific way that it just doesn't care about a lot of the cards your opponent has at the end of the day. And their cards don't really answer what you're doing very well. And really, you just lose the race sometimes. Like, sometimes they just outrace you. They have a key counter spell, but for the most part, especially like I like your idea of going for a creatureless strategy in games too, where you've just made so many cards in their hand dead that you've just eliminated all forms of interaction with them, and effectively you've made them mulligan. And so
Yeah, and there's a lot of decks out there that right now, blowing up lands like the Monarch and the Tron, if you can actually close out the game, it's pretty good. Like, Monarch wants to cast their prismatic strands, but I've found it's really, really good if your spell still does something in blowing up their land. You've given yourself time to draw more spells, so that's where my money's on right now. I just think that people aren't playing Burn right.
Do you remember that red-green Ponza list from Conley Woods?
Yeah.
I think that deck with like 2 copies or maybe more of Colossal Dreadmaw could actually be pretty good right now. Because the thing that I saw with that deck was that like it just didn't have very powerful threats to close out the game. Like, it blew up all your lands and then didn't do anything for a couple turns. So I really like the idea of having the Arbor Elf Utopia Sprawl package to ramp you into that powerful land destruction and like Moon Volley Acid Moss, that kind of stuff. And then you just have a huge threat that when it sticks can end the game pretty quickly. I don't necessarily like it against, I don't know. I don't think it's good against Delver because they only need like 1 or 2 lands to operate on, and they have
that's
days.
what I was gonna say.
they have dazes and stuff, but I mean, against Tron, that seems great, and against Monarch, I think that's probably okay too. Having that powerful land destruction. The biggest thing that I found was just that you just didn't have a good way of closing the game out, and your opponent would just rebuild.
I'm just skeptical because the Gush matchup, I can't get behind it there. Of like, I was trying to think like, okay, maybe on those turns where they have like Swamp Island or like an odd like or just one island or something like that, you could go for it then, and
Yeah,
and so they can't Gush and just 3-for-1 you, but they still have days, so
yeah.
I'm not so sure.
But I mean, like, if they daze, didn't you just do your job anyway? Because they're still down a land drop.
Yeah, but they're guaranteed to keep making land drops.
Sure.
So you got to close out the game quick. Maybe you're right there.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely don't know that I don't like it against Delver, I think, at all. Just in theory. Anyway, we should get out of here because I'm sick of talking. And I have a huge headache. But
Okay.
that was the show, everybody. I'm going to let Sean do the closing thing.
Okay, let's get into end times.
End times.
Thank you guys for listening. Visit our Patreon at patreon.com/common knowledge. We've got our graph of the power rankings over the last year. We have all of 2018 up, and we're going to be doing 2019. That's free. You don't have to pay anything. We've got our Common Coliseum, where it's just Brandon versus me, playing on Magic Online, just having some fun. And then we've got our 5-card blind stretch goal. If we hit $50, we're going to hold a free tournament with MTGO credit as a prize. If you guys want to do something else, we can do something else. No suggestions have been made yet. I'm still super excited about it if we can hit that. And just, if you guys want to support the show, and we don't have that many incentives right now. Like, we're doing our best here. If you have any suggestions, we're open to them. But it's really just supporting the show is what your money is going towards, and we really do appreciate it. We don't really make that much money. We're not the big guy. So thank you for the people that are. It's great. Visit Constructed Criticism on YouTube. There are podcasts and deck techs for all kinds of different formats. You can find our videos there if you want to see what we look like. If you can leave comments on our YouTube, we check the last 3 videos for comments. If any of them are pertinent enough, they will get read on the show. If you want to contact us a different way, you can email us at commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com. Corrections are always appreciated. Comments, suggestions for show topics. We've even just ran through someone's brew and just rebrewed it, and that was tons of fun. Thank you to our sponsors, puremtgo.com and inkedgaming.com. On inkedgaming.com, use the coupon code CCMTG10 for 10% off checkout. And then, where can they find us, Brandon?
You can find us on Twitter at CKPodcastMTG. You can find us on Facebook if you search for Common Knowledge. We've got a group there. You can find Sean on YouTube. Just search for Lobbert, Lobbert. You can also find Sean on Twitter at Lobbert8. And you can find me on Twitter at bclark_CK.
And if the guy squatting on the username Lobbert without the 8 could just stop, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, screw Lobbert.
Bye, everybody.
Lobbert 8 is the one we love.